talk which we are going to have today is largely through on a subject which Mr. Jahn has worked with very closely, and this is expressed partly in his book Muntu. I think some of the main ideas would be in Muntu. I hope that some of you have read either Muntu or Through African Doors, and there will be, as usual, time for questions afterwards. I'm very glad that we have you here.
How long shall it be? Up to 9 o'clock? Or?
Up to 9. Well, yes, there are usually questions for about an hour.
Yeah, all right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, African medicine is on the one side interesting, on the other side a dangerous subject. I'm going to defend practices which many people think are just wrong. And I'm trying to show what the principle of African medicine is, linking it with the value system, which I will shortly outlay only in its outlines. How did I come to it at all? I did not observe, and I want to say that before, African witch doctors in practice, nor did I do field work about it. It was exactly the other way round. When I had written Muntu, I came across reports of Western doctors, majority German, who had been for years in Africa practicing in hospitals, and as most people do who spent some time, more than 2 weeks in Africa, wrote a book about it. And so they wrote books about their experiences with African patients. Most of these doctors had spent many years in Africa and put in these books questions they could not answer. Why did the African patient behave like this or like that? And applying the African value system and thinking, it was for me quite easy to answer why African patients in these cases had behaved like this. And that's all what I did. I used the material of others and was looking for an explanation. The point of view is in first case philosophical. If we ask ourselves, what is medicine? What is medicine in the Western world? How do we define illness, and when is it that somebody is sick? Usually we say we feel pain, and then there's something wrong. Is that the real start of illness? In the moment when we just feel pain? Can illness be thought as something different? In the Western world, we see our body as an object. And if with this body is something wrong, we feel pain, and we run to the doctor to help us. That means we expect from him that he takes another object, a tablet, a vaccination, something like that, and repairs the machine of our body which does not behave as we expect it to do. In our thinking, thus, we are in pragmatical medicine concerned just mostly with this aspect. Even studying medicine, medicine does not begin with a living person, but with a corpse in anatomy. Our objective thinking requires that we transform something living into subsequent stages of something not living but describable. We cannot describe life and what life is. No philosophy and no medicine of the world has so far found out. Life is not a physical reaction. Life is still, in all cultures, a secret. Now, something more?
No, you must be going the wrong way. Go ahead.
To explain why we think like that in the Western world and why in African thinking, and when I speak of Africa, I always mean Africa south of the Sahara, outside Islamic influence, I have to explain in short the value system. In African thinking, the world is composed of a universe of living forces. Everything is force, not has force, and these forces are living. Every force is a living force. A human being is a force. An animal, a plant is a force. Not has force, but is force. Stones, objects, beauty, yesterday, places, all these are forces, including tape recorders are forces as well. We can group them to get out the values where the emphasis is. First group, Muntu. Muntu forces, I cannot say in the plural. You see, Muntus, because that's wrong. It's Bantu as a plural of Muntu, not to mix it up. So Muntu forces are forces which are able to think, including human beings, living beings, deceased beings, deified beings, orishas, spirits, up to the Creator God. Here inside Muntu is a hierarchy. At the basis of it is the living Muntu being, Muzima, plural of course Bazima. Then the deceased are Muzimu, plural Buzimu. Then orishas. Muntu forces are all those who are able to influence and to command all other forces by applying the magic word Nomo. Second group, Kintu. Kintu forces are those forces which have no activity out of themselves. They are, so to say, sleeping until they get an order what to do, until a Muntu force tells them, using Nomo, what to do, calls them into action. Third group, Hantu, unity of time and space. I do not need that for explaining medicine, so I jump over it. It's a very complicated problem. I deal with that when I speak of music and so on. Group 4, Kuntu. To make it easier, Muntu answers to the question who, Kintu answers to the question what, Hantu answers to the question where and when, Kuntu answers to the question how. Inside Kuntu forces again we have a hierarchy. On top of it, Nomo, the magic word. This is an ontological system at first, as it is expressed by Alexis Kagame in his book La philosophie bantou-rwandaise des lettres. Now, turning it over into a value system, we have to ask ourselves which is the top value in it? Where is the emphasis? It is a system with which you could describe every culture, and every value system is an inherent grammar in a culture. Value means to know what is right and what is wrong, what is beautiful, what is ugly, what is good and what is bad. And as each culture, according to the value system, forms itself, it is naturally the best culture possible, and all other cultures are inferior. That means according to the value system of the Western world, African culture is inferior. According to the value system of African culture, Western culture is inferior. If we have got that, we have got a lot and understood a lot about what can be done and how we can understand other cultures at all, because it makes no sense at all to apply one value system of one culture and analyze with it a value system, the values of another culture. That always goes wrong then. So what remains to do for us is to look into other cultures through their value system. Now, where are the values? Quite visible. In the Western world, the emphasis of expression of the culture is in Kintu. We have objective thinking, pragmatic medicine. We construct and control all kinds of objects and tools. In African culture, the emphasis is on how things are done, not on what is done. On Kuntu forces. Now let us look into medicine. I said before that in Western world we consider our body as akin to as an object, and when with this body something is wrong, we use other objects to cure him. It is a medicine specifically in the Kintu realm. In African medicine, it is different. It is Kuntu medicine. It is the application of the magic word, of the Nomo, not to the body, but to Kuntu forces again. Sickness is not considered as something which is wrong in the body. It is something being wrong in the relations, in the how, in the relations between beings, between different forces, be it Muntu forces among each other, or be Musima forces among each other, or between the living and the deceased. Something is wrong in relations. So, not the pain can only be in African thinking a symptom for something spiritually wrong. It does not indicate something wrong in the machinery. Every disease visible through kintu, a body, is only the reflection of being something wrong in the general disorder. There is disorder. There is no disease in the Western sense. It is disorder. Disorders of different kinds. The medicine thus includes more than just to cure a body. Sadness, unhappiness is illness. Nomo is the magic word I use. Magara is the life force I have. By influence of more and more nomo, of word, of spell, of influence through the magic word, my magara, my life force, my happiness, my having full life increases or declines. Thus, a child born is at first akin to, is an object. Before having a name, it is an object. Then by designation as the work of art, it gets a meaning. It becomes, by the name, a human being, getting magara through the nomo of an ancestor, getting a name. It's force. And this force the baby has to get by action, and I'll tell later of what kind of action. This magara increases until the grown-up person has to have full magara. Full magara includes happiness, well-being, feeling himself or herself a full human being. In the harmony of the universe, every person has to have full magara. If somebody has not full magara, if, as he might say, he is dying, the full magara is owed to him or her by the whole universe, theoretically. Every person has a right, an undeniable right, to have full magara. What is thus wrong? What is disease? If somebody does not have full magara. If somebody's magara is just not fully there. To have no magara means to die. The deceased have no magara, they are magara. They are magara, they have no magara. The deceased can give magara to others by using nomo. This is the interrelationship between nomo and magara. Magara thus being the essential quality a person has to have, the medicine man is the one to look after it, that if somebody is complaining of not having full Magara, to give him treatment, to influence him so that he will re-establish the fullness of his Magara. Thus, illness in the African sense includes unhappiness, sorrows, anger, and physical disease, of course. But physical disease is only an indication that something else is wrong. And the analysis the medicine man, the doctor, has to do is to find out who or what caused the disorder, the lack of Magara. Who can be the cause? Never akin to, never an object, never a bacteria, never a bacilli or things like that. No objects can be the cause. In African thinking of lack of Magara, of disease, behind every disease is a Muntu force. By what now has this particular Muntu force caused the disorder, the disease? That depends. Either it's a Musima, a living person. A living person can cause disease by swearing to somebody, by giving bad looks, by using bad nomo. Kinds of this are not, this cause is not to be treated by the medicine man, that is to be done more by a juridical procedure. Because it is not the problem of the medicine man to deal with law. It is against law to use the influence one has through nomo, contrary to the purpose to establish harmony. To cause disharmony, thus, is a crime. And if one Musima causes disease, anger, bad things of another, this belongs into the criminal section, not into medicine. In medicine, where lack of Magara is caused is by Musimu and Orisha forces. That means by higher beings. Or if it cannot be found out where the disorder comes from, when the causing Musima is not known. The regulation according to which now can Orisha and Musima forces cause a lack of Magara by their nomo. But they do not do so without need. That means the person who has misbehaved against an Orisha or a Musimu will, as result and answer, receive a disease, a disorder, a lack of Magara. So it's in this case the person's own fault of having done something wrong. It has to be remade by a certain kind of sacrifice to pacify the angry superior muntu force. This is then one method of healing. It is mostly combined with something different. The sacrifice as an action, as a nomo towards Orisha or Musima, alone is not sufficient. There is to be more treatment, a treatment of a longer time in which more than this is necessary and used. Because you can influence, as I said before, muntu to another muntu directly, but you can influence also indirectly by loading up inferior forces, kintu forces, with a nomo and make them work like this. By designation, an inferior force, a kintu force, gets a nomo of action, and this then works. This is the meaning of African art, which is a nomo and gets its meaning to represent something, or it is the same with all kind of medicines, amulets, and all those medicine man practices. Here in this case, the object is not important at all. It is only the carrier of a magic word. If somebody has used this kind of medicine in bad intention towards somebody else, this somebody else can defend himself by using a counter medicine for protection, which is stronger than the medicine aggressing him. But the medicine, the kintu, is just an object. Out of itself, it does nothing whatsoever. It is the word connected with it which provokes the action. So all amulets, all the herbs, are firstly considered in their effect as being active words. Certainly, some, in the Western sense, kintu value is attached to them as well. Just as in Western medicine, we have the same, that we know that the psychological treatment, the influence of the doctor, has something to help the tablets that they get effective. We see like this, that the treatment of the medicine man is kuntu medicine, is a medicine using magic words to re-establish order. Using either towards the patient, the nomo directly, or using it indirectly by loading up kintu forces, by loading up medicines. As every disease must have a cause, and there is nothing without a cause, by some Muntu, there remains something which cannot be solved directly, and there comes from the belief in witchcraft, which is just the opposite of medicine. A witch is a person using criminally, like a criminal, his normal force, not for the benefit of the universal harmony, but for purposely destroying this harmony, for giving power to himself. But this kind of application of medicine, this witchcraft in traditional Africa, is the highest crime possible. It is not, as Western observers have believed, the norm that a medicine man is just a kind of a witchcraft doctor. It is just a contradiction of it, and whoever was found out to be a witch had the most horrible kind of death. He was not to die as a Musima, as a Muntu being, but he was to die as a Kintu, as an animal. Because if he would have died as a Musima, with a funeral, he would have been raised into the rank of Musimu, into a higher person, without Magara, but with more normal force, and would be still more dangerous then. So this specific person had to be thrown out of the Muntu rank, to be put into Kintu rank, into the rank of objects and animals, was not receiving a funeral, but chased off without food to be eaten by hyenas, or to be burnt, or to be thrown in pieces into the river, according to the society. And whoever was found out to do this was treated like this. So, for every medicine man, there was the danger, in case of wrong application of his normal medicine, to be accused to be a witch. So here, from this roots the high ethics of African medicine men, which have the same importance there in medicine as in Western medicine, the Hippocratical Oath. If we compare, we see that Kuntu medicine is something essentially different from Kintu medicine. It has on the one side a much larger reach, because every kind of unhappiness, as I said, is considered disease. When you take what the African doctors, herb doctors, write on their pamphlets, even in modern times, I have at home several of them collected, doctors who in print, in African languages, explain what they can do. And they name down all the diseases for which they feel themselves competent to heal. You will see in the first rank that they are connected with offspring. First disease, usually said, is if a woman is barren, she should come to see me. In Western thinking, a woman who does not get children will not consider herself ill if she doesn't feel any pain. In African thinking, this is the worst of all possible diseases and disorders at all. Because the relationship between Musima and Musimu ancestors is just based on this, that the ancestors are fed by the nomo of the living. And if there are no living children left, the ancestors will die. A whole chain of ancestors so can die if there is no living offspring. This is considered to be the top disorder, and you will read that in most of the pamphlets at the first. Secondly, all the possible diseases which can happen for the creation of offspring less in the sense of venereal disease as in the sense of psychological disease. In more than 50% of all the diseases mentioned in those advertisements, it deals with these subjects, up to subjects: if you feel bad when the moon rises, come and see me. To feel bad when the moon rises, again, a disorder, a lack of Magara. The result of this medicine is that the medicine man knows an enormous amount of what we call in the West psychological treatment, and that he is much superior to any psychologist in the Western world. In Western thinking, you know, psychology, depth psychology, the regulation of the subconscious is something quite new. In Western tradition, it did not exist at all and was not believed to be a disease at all, to be controllable. And still, depth psychology in the Western world is put into some contact with magic, with something not quite serious. Here in the African world, what is magic, uncontrollable, not understandable, is the way of Kintu medicine. Thus, I go over to the results of these two. We have by that a side remark. You know that depth psychology and the analysis of psychoanalysis was discovered in our century by Sigmund Freud, who, by having heard of what happened in Africa, got to the idea that something like the control of the subconscious is possible at all. This is already the first step of African influence towards the West. And Freud wrote, as you know, a book, Totem and Taboo. He interested himself very much into African psychological treatment. He misunderstood it, as in that time African art and all was misunderstood. Nevertheless, it was a push and an influence. Now we see in Western world pragmatical medicine, traditional Western medicine, is excellent where you have really to do with objects. In diseases caused by, let's say, Kintu forces, by bacteria, bacilli, and so on. And in the case where you can take a knife and cut something away. There, Western medicine is excellent, and African medicine, underestimating the Kintu forces, is rather helpless. On the other hand, where you can treat by nomo, where it is possible to influence the being, his will to become healthy again, where there is a possibility to treat people, let's say, psychologically, there is a great field of African medicine. The field is enormous because it includes unhappiness as a disease. Don't forget that. The specific treatment here is that the medicine man tries and does fortify the individual by strengthening his will to become healthy again by wanting to have full Magara. The object, as I said, is of no value. Now what happened in the cultural contact? The African still sees in the object used, in the tablet swallowed, as a substance, something completely innocent, something of no value. Only the nomo connected with it is important. He will not ask the doctor about the reason, about the quality and the specification of the disease. He wants to know, do you have the right nomo, the right magic to cure me? If the doctor says yes, all right. And he will take then every kind of treatment. This treatment even should be painful because it helps to make the spell, the magic word, more effective. There is connected with it the sense of forcing the offended Orisha into pacification. The right term is Sühnezwang. What's that? No term for that in English. By punishing myself, I force the spirit to be nice to me, to forget my guilt towards him. Is it clear? That's what I call Sühnezwang, but there should be an English term for that too. Perhaps expiation?
Expiation.
Well, by expiation, I must remember that. By expiation, I influence the other. You see, while Western medicine wants to make the object, the curing object, agreeable. It should not smell ugly. The tablets are covered with something sweet so that they are agreeable to swallow, because the Westerner believes in the object as such, and it should be agreeable. For the African, it's different. It should not be that. The more horrible it is, the more it will punish him and be an expiation influencing the Orisha. You know that in many reports of travelings, Western observers have said, seeing the substances offered on African markets as medicine, oh, those Africans seem to like to swallow as horrible things as you can see there, or to carry them around. Not at all. They dislike them just as much as a Western observer. But because they are so horrible, because they are so ugly and horribly to take, they have the effect of expiation, to have the effect to force the Orisha into action. The importance here is that all these objects not even need to be swallowed. And that's what many doctors observe, that if they give an African patient in an hospital a tablet to swallow, which even is sweet, the African patient doesn't like to take it. They have, as a report, to have a special man there who gives the man a drink and then gives him looks in his mouth that he has really swallowed it. And the doctors were very much surprised about that they didn't like to swallow those fine, sweet tablets. It's the contrary. They would have liked to carry them around, because as soon as they're agreeably swallowed, the expiation value is off. In the Kuntu medicine, and secondly, the whole value is off because the object is gone with its connected nomo. What they prefer is to carry it around, possibly at the most uncomfortable part of the body, to be remembered every moment at the nomo connected with it. The patient, thus, is in a complete different kind of attitude towards these objects. He even prefers an operation or a syringe injection to just a tablet, because that's something which shows activity and which has more nomo, because it has more action in it. So the general attitude is completely different. I must here stress the point that in African medicine, on the other hand, there was Kintu medicine as well, only less regarded and of less value. The herbalists are specialists in the Kintu value of the herbs. The skull trepanation was done in Africa before it was done in Europe, a very complicated kind of operation. In the Congo, with the Baluba, for example, uranium was used to heal wounds. So, the side of Kintu medicine in Africa was not completely neglected, it was only relatively underestimated. On the other hand, in the Western world, also experience and confession had a role in medicine. Often the taking in of the history of the patient turned over to be a personal confession of the patient to the doctor, helping him in the treatment, something which belongs into the Kuntu region. So you see, there is nothing really in I could not say there is no Kintu medicine at all in Africa, and I could not say there is no Kuntu medicine in the West. But the emphasis is different. So the result too is different. The big important achievements of the West are in Kintu medicine, and the big achievements of African culture are in Kuntu medicine. So Africa owes a lot to the West because of fighting against diseases like malaria, typical Kintu disease, and diseases like this. On the other hand, the West owes a lot to Africa and still will have to learn of Kuntu treatment. Important still is here to remark that between Musima and Musimu is death. The position of death is different in African culture than in Western culture. Death is the enemy number one of the Western doctor. It is not, of course, the enemy number one of the African medicine man. His enemy number one is called not death, but disorder. So, the full life should be established in African medicine, but death is not a threat as it is in Western thinking, because the patient can die not only of a disease, but just from the wish to die. And all Western doctors who have been a long time in Africa often found patients who had no physical disease whatsoever, but were so unhappy that they were dying, and because of unhappiness really died, because all their magara was gone off. It is a difficult analysis for the Westerner, but for African medicine this gets clear by psychological unhappiness, where the medicine man loses his influence because of the greatness and of the patient, his unhappiness. He will happily then die. I have used already an hour, and I think we can get over to questions so that I can get more into specifications.
Thank you very much. There were many questions.
If we could go back again to the idea of nomo, and is this idea of the magic word essentially the nomo that is developed in his work with the Dogon? In going into the Dogon thought, one wonders to what extent it would compare with the Bantu structure that is outlined. When we all develops the idea of nomo as having essentially contradictory or complementary or binary forces, that is of there being at least 3 nomos in Dogon values, one for the creation of men, for the creation of lineages, and third for the creation of skills and institutions.
Yeah.
And these he saw, at least in one reading of him, as the forces of light versus darkness, of evil versus good, of good crops versus bad crops. And it would appear that the whole Dogon value system, according to Leo, was built on this interaction of complementary or contradictory forces. But how would this reconcile with the Bantu structure, which is systematic and
Well, we are really not clear about that. You are quite right. And the split in Nomo, the possible different applications I have already said, and you know, when you take temples rules, it becomes quite clear that you can specify Nomo for the special purpose, because you always need to have the correct Nomo to obtain a certain result. Here, the idea of good and evil does, as far as I have found, not exist in most West African and Bantu cultures except Dogon. And I have the question to that, whether that is not, Dogon are very at the edge and are very near and surrounded by Islam since centuries, whether that is not an influence which comes from the Islamic jinn. I always asked myself that question, why is just in the Dogon system here something which is incompatible with the other system, where you have no bad Orisha. Every Orisha is good and bad according to the treatment you give to him. To explain it, in an example which is taken out of medicine. In Yoruba thinking, in Yoruba religion, an Orisha called Chakpana is there, who is giving, bringing and taking away smallpox, a very dangerous disease. He's not bad. That depends how you treat him, whether he's bad or not, whether he's really bad. Smallpox we would consider in first grade bad, wouldn't we? Now, the Chakpana was worshipped in the following way. That is, all worship has to be action, because it's Nomo worship. That after a specific preparation, spiritually and physically, the worshipper infected himself with smallpox, thinking that if he does so, he will only have a small disease of smallpox. But if he does forget this and does not worship Chakpana, Chakpana will revenge himself, and one day, in a big a plague, no, it's not plague, kill all those who did not worship him. So when in the beginning of the century in Western Nigeria, in Yoruba country, there came the vaccination lorries to do the inoculations against smallpox. People first resisted, then it was found out by somebody that that is not so much different. And they said, let's give the lorry the symbol of Chakpana, and the man who does the vaccination has a headwear of a Chakpana priest. So people understood, and really the modernization of this sacrifice is just normal smallpox vaccination, and was believed it is more liked by the Orisha Chakpana because he since then kills less people.
discussing Shakpana and its Dahomian counterpart, Sagbata, again, you run into something of the same thing that you run into in the Dogon and in a great deal of West Africa, it would seem, was the idea of creation taking place through these binary forces, through these dualities, and yet even in raising the question of smallpox in West Africa, one also raises the question of the problem of evil. For instance, in the Home, the smallpox victims or plague victims could not be buried in ordinary cemeteries by ordinary people. Same with the lightning people, and sorcerers had the power to totally remove a person from memory, and that person could not be considered a part of the lineage. And it would seem to me that the implication of this would be that death was just as horrible of an idea, at least in this element of African culture, as you attribute it to being in Western.
Yes, especially here, because I find here is an accusation of real disharmony if something like that happens. I would consider it as being one of these crimes I spoke of, where the disease indicates a crime against harmony.
Well, you stated that
he is not content with my answer, I see that.
This is probably true, but you have a whole range of activities of sorcerers, it would seem, whose activities are not fully explained by this system. Some of them continue to live and function as prophets in society. Others commit their crimes, but may be excused, may be expiated of their crimes and aren't killed. In some places they are killed. It seems to me that the sorcerers and demons still remain outside of the system.
I would not say so, that they necessarily are outside the system, but that you can see it. You see here, the problem for me in all these things is this. I know Nomo is on the top, but what comes then? And here I have to admit that I'm still helpless. Here, if we find out the exact, precise hierarchy into Kuntu, we can solve these problems more precisely. And there might be, as it is here too in the value system, there are, in these different cultures of different groups, other different different hierarchies. I give you, here the problem for me, for example, is Nomo really a part of Kintu? Magara only another form of Nomo? Do they both together make Kuntu? Or is it all Nomo filling up? And is Kuntu equal to Nomo? All these problems have enormous consequences for your questions. Secondly, the position, what is then a crime? What is disorder in the function can only be solved when we know all these minor hierarchies. You see, you have, for example, for inner hierarchies here, the difference between on the agricultures have as highest value in Kintu the plant, lower value the animal, then the tools. You have with the Watusi completely the different. You have at the top of Kintu the animal, then the plant, and then the tools. You have even differences like that when you look at it in Europe, in Kintu. We are Kintu culture, but we do not agree about it in our inner values even. A German will always spend more money for his housing than for eating or for his dress. A Frenchman will spend more money relatively for eating than for housing or dress, and an Italian will spend more money for dress than for housing or eating. You see, these differences you have, And it's a question of interpretation inside the culture, how they are solved. Now, where is the point where the crime starts? And what I'm now up to is to find somebody who looks into African law. You see, you have this case, you have read Muntu very well, where I quote this problem of which Temples gives about the sheep which was killed and then the replacement of it. But when, to make myself understood, somebody had given into, person A had given into custody of person B, a sheep or a goat or whatever it was, and that goat was killed by the dog of B or by some other dog, it's not clear. Now person A returns, claims his property back, and gets another goat. After a week he's asked, do you still feel unhappy? That means, do you now have full Magara? He says, no, I haven't. He gets a second sheep. Now after a week he's asked again, do you now have full Magara? No, he still hasn't. He gets a third sheep and 100 francs in addition, and then he says, now I have full Magara. Now let's imagine he would have asked now for more sheep again. Where is the limit where he would start to, where the thing would go over, and the other man says, now I'm starting to lose Magara, my happiness, because he's overdoing it. But we don't know yet where the overdoing point lies, which obviously in all African societies is known, that point. And here it is a question, where starts the crime? Can the Orisha commit a crime by sending the seas? Or can an Orisha not commit a crime? This problem is not solved yet. What is that means? When an Orisha can commit a crime, it can be bad. Can it be only a living being? As we know, the sorcerer can. And where does the sorcerer get rid of the crime? But I think these are now detailed questions which have to be found out.
And what will they do to this Bantu structure of Muntu as a way of solving these particular questions, which may be similar for every society? Will the Bantu structure still be applicable to a wide range of societies, that range from those having a high god to those that are almost anarchists?
I would say yes, because that has nothing to do with Bantu at all. You see, this value system, I only use a Bantu vocabulary for it, because Kagame has offered it. But I go far beyond that. I started to describe, as I have done, even Western civilization according to the system. And say, here are values. Here is emphasis. This is more considered, more valuable than that. Here people have concentrated thinking about. And the differences between African tribes and West African, East Africa, and Dogon and Bantu and so on will all show up here in the inner hierarchies. There comes the differences out. So we can use the system without doubt. We only have to be careful how far we can carry it. That means how far it helps us to give a meaning. Every structure like this, we should not forget, is just a tool to find out general meanings which make certain behaviors predictable. If we cannot predict anything anymore with it, we throw it away. Just a tool.
You are therefore saying that in every society there is a philosophy which could be analysed in terms of who, what, where, when, and how. But to these philosophical principles you have given the African names taken from Kagame.
Yeah.
So that in itself there is nothing specifically African, it's entirely in terms of emphasis. You could use this approach to, as you say, France or Germany or Britain or New Guinea. It depends on the outlook of the people, irrespective of the social structure, irrespective of the time, because in each case this will be redefined.
Yes. It might even be that we could construct a better system which gives more detail and more specification to certain facts. I would throw it away any time when I have a better one. You see? It is just that it helps me to get some more meaning, specifically in Africa. Perhaps for the Western civilization, this method is not the best. Because we have then in Kintu is filled up with so many things that we have to have here a special kind of subdivisions and so on, which there are not made, and here for the African problem not so necessary. We have in the African, as I said before, already to find out here the whole Kuntu realm to specify into detail, and we will have to do that. But as general, you can use any kind of system. Please.
I don't see how this would fit to the East African Bantu because the concept is completely the opposite. I don't think that, for example, the Kikuyu would ever be, would put more emphasis on how or whether the Nomo and Magara really represent the Kikuyu concept of these values. The Magara would have nothing at all to do as far as the Kikuyu are concerned. And also, the Nomo, the way you use it, would only apply to the high God and not to the living people or the dead. The dead and God. God is the only person who has the power to do harm to anybody, but he doesn't do harm to anybody. He withdraws if people are unable to fulfill their obligations towards him.
Well,
and
that
then
is general.
the evil spirits take over. In which case you have two things, not the person who is causing the sickness. But again, I don't think I would use the Magara, which is the life force, as you call it, that a person withdraws. You said that the child gets a little bit, and it's not a human being when it's born. This, again, would be, it's a wrong concept, because a human being, whether it's born or not, once it has been conceived, it's still a living thing until it's...
Well, living is all.
Well,
Living is all. I do not contradict. That does not contradict so far what you say.
But you say that it only gets the life force when it has a name.
Yes, that's what I said.
I don't think that I would accept that.
You would not either.
Specifically.
It has a life force before it is a name.
Before its name.
Yes.
The name, it's only...
Yes, but you see, a life force it has. Anyhow, every animal has a life force. Every stone, every object has a life force.
No, not necessarily. Not the same kind of life force.
Not the same
A
kind of...
stone or a tree doesn't have any life force.
Mhm.
It's only human beings and animals who are living things.
Mhm.
The trees may be living things, but they don't have any power at all.
Yeah, they
to
have to
living
be.
because they cannot move.
Yeah.
But still, even human beings, the only human beings, those who have power to cause any harm to anybody, is the witch doctors who have studied
Mm.
the herbs, which may be poisonous, but have studied other things that could
Mm.
harm other people, but not everybody who can use this force as you stated it.
I have read quite carefully Kenyatta's book, Facing Mount Kenya, and it would be rather in contradiction with what you say.
What's the contradiction?
That here I found that it reflects the system completely, just in Kikuyu. That you know that here the importance of the medicine man is underlined in the book, and the degree of life force that it is there in a born being, but it does the child before having a name get a funeral if it dies?
That,
There we are.
yes, some kind of a funeral.
Some kind, but does it get a correct full funeral? Wow.
Because
Yeah.
only if it died stillborn, if a child came into the world and didn't cry, then that was already dead.
Uh-huh.
And
You
it's
see,
it's not given a name because it cannot carry that name to anybody. But you also, if you have read Kinger's book, there
Yeah.
are two definitions of a witch doctor and a medicine man.
yes, that's the distinction which I made
Yes,
too.
and neither one of them has the power to give anybody the life force or the magana, as you call it.
Yeah.
But they have the knowledge to tell you what you can do,
Mhm.
what medicines you can use
Yeah,
to regain your health,
yeah,
but not to cause it to go away.
yeah. I do not see that what you say does not contradict. You see, you have, for example, with the children in Yoruba, the Abiku child. The Abiku child is given to a mother. But it is not considered yet as a. It is considered as a muntu, but not as a muzima. That means it's a spirit child and is born to die. That's an abiku. And the mother has to give it plenty of affection so that it will remain among the living. If not, it dies and will to be reborn by the same mother again, sometimes several times, until it has got so much affection that it stays and gets special privilege as an abiku child. I see that there are, and I did not say that there are no variations to it, but in general I do not find it contradictory.
We tend to interpret this question of a child that it dies before it has been given a name and is regarded as a thing, in terms more of its development in a social group. It's not yet recognized as having a social personality. It's not yet a person in terms of the relationship which develops between people. One doesn't expect it onto a sort of general philosophic basis. I think that this is partly a difference in approach, that one operates more in terms of actual relationships within a society rather than in terms of general creative forces, in the same way as names change and personalities change through initiation and other stages of development. So that it's very difficult. You see, it's difficult, I find, to apply a broad philosophical, I find it fascinating, a broad philosophical scheme to societies which one thinks are very much in terms of organization and development, changing through time. And this has a timelessness which, and in some ways, there you can put in your details, your particular details, where, for example, the Gikuyu would differ from the Hehe or any other peoples. You can deal with that in terms of group relationship and individual relationship. It's difficult to deal with it in terms of a philosophical scheme.
I would not say so, because in case there is harmony, the social rank has to coincide with the philosophical rank. You see, we should not forget that all these values are, as in every society, ideals, which not in every case are reached. If we have in Western society, let's say, a value, thou shalt not murder, we would be silly to say there is no murder, but anyhow, the value still remains.
Well, before I can make
Well,
that.
no. For instance, you get some systems, though, that would appear to be riddled with contradictions. The newer, for instance, according to their idea of a value system, had something that was originally what we would call fatalist, in that everything was the will of the bon Dieu. But within the last 50 years, there have been prophets, priests, and seers introduced into newer system, apparently from the Dinka. This is a contradiction within the system, one that doesn't bother the newer at all, and one that they don't even think about.
Yeah, right.
The Mossy, for instance, of Upper Volta, you can find perhaps 5 animist spirits that are common to 4 of the main tribal groupings, yet the points of emphasis are totally different from one region to another. And again, among the Dahomians, within their pantheon of gods, there were over 50 cult groups, each taking its own point of emphasis from the mythology, and in trying to find a system to these 3 I don't know, you want to throw up your hands, because it seems almost impossible to do. You can find plenty of contradictions, you can find differences of emphasis, and what you get at work are more modalities, more forces at work without necessarily converging.
No, you are quite right. You see, it's like a grammar in a language. No grammar without exceptions on the one side, and secondly, you have the problem always that here you find the number of orishas, how many there can be. There is an enormous difference between the different groups, how many there are, what function they are, and you come to groups where you have more or less for every specification of force a special personification. I would say that are then Kuntu forces which got deified, turned over into thinking forces. Shakpana, you see here as an example again, is a disease, as such a Kuntu force. It would be some action, just some an abstract principle of a disease, of an active force, somehow force in nature, like fertility, like creativity, and so on. And it gets in religion personified into an orisha of that type, who cannot have all activities, only a specific one, linked to the specific detail. That means all orishas together, then forming something like Olorum, the creator god, representative of that.
I'm interested in the analytical categories here, forces. I don't quite understand whether Muntu, Kintu, Hantu, or Kuntu are all separate groups of forces. And if they are separate, mutually exclusive categories of forces, what in any given society or society in general is the vital force which unifies them into any kind of a system?
Two.
We got a little bit. All right, now.
You see, these are the specifications of Ntu. Ntu would be the universal force, the universe of forces.
So your Elan Vital and world force is this developmental?
I don't know.
Does it develop over time? Does it develop over
I would say, you see, as far as I can see it now, that the idea of Ntu is philosophy. In here, so far, without that, it is Weltanschauung. You see, the difference is this, that as soon as you start reflecting about it, what Kagame does, you turn over something called Weltanschauung into philosophy. Because philosophy, by definition, needs reflection upon, and starting with abstracts. And then we get into the reach of abstracts. That's why I now write it on and not did it before.
Would you say that these terms were particularly apt for African society because of the emphasis on the person? The point which you develop in your book as distinct from the individual, this is essentially the person in the group, and therefore this terminology is much more graphic in relation to a particular society than the who, what, where, when, and how, where there is no unifying thing, unless one developed a certain terminology with a thing as the root.
I see that. You see, the whole then answers to the question, why? Altogether is just why. And so what we get out of it is meaning, not more. You are looking for more, aren't you? Here. No? You see? What we try to find out, and I see the difficulties myself, and that's what we are working on and try to continue. How far can we go with that, and what problems are solved? That is still a question. You see, last night I could show something we can say about art. We can say something about literature, we can say something about medicine. But to get into every depth, to get to the detail down, we still have a long way to do. It's only a suggestion, this method, to solve some problems which so far have not been solved. Whether we can solve them at all, I do not know. We will try.
I would like to ask Dr. Longo, who has been working as a practicing doctor in Nigeria, if this philosophical framework is helpful in explaining some of the things which he was struggling with with the orientation from
Pretty much of a Kintu level, I'm afraid. I don't know, we certainly saw a number of things that were unexplainable. People, as you say, that would just die, and try to explore this and say, well, you just can't recover, and you autopsy them and send specimens to the chemists at the, down at the patent at the university and all this, and there's no explanation for this. But I think this is very intriguing, how real it is, or, being opposed from being something just very artificial. I don't know, I think that the idea of the approach to the psychological is certainly valid. I think that perhaps the philosophy, the psychologists who talk about the Gestalt have something like this.
Well, modern medicine tries to come nearer to that. Did you also observe that by a kind of irony, the very dangerous and by no part innocent poison medicine of Western civilization gets into the African context, really into something like Kintu, that, for example, penicillin is so abused because it is just used against worms and everything, where it is not to be applied at all, because the African believes in the word, in the magic connected with it, not in the object, so that finally it becomes a placebo, a thing meaning nothing and really of no value. And you have on the other side the critical experiments of Professor Jelinek and his friends, who observed in the critical Western society that there is a lot of Kuntu belief too in medicine, that if you take a tablet against headache, which is no tablet against headache, but just a placebo, that means nothing, but packed like one, it will, in 60% of the cases, have an excellent effect on the person and will cure. And if the doctor in the hospital applying this placebo instead of a real tablet also believes that the tablet is a right one and not a fake, then the percentage of positive results is even higher. So here again you have this. I think that many of our Western industry could not live without this aspect too, because most of our complicated formulas are nothing than magic and placebo and Kuntu medicine instead of Kintu medicine. Yeah.
On this point about Western medicine and the preponderance of death in Western society as not being quite so evident in African society, might be interested to go back to something that you developed in the book, the idea of death as a destroyer, so as a Western conception. One wonders, though, where in Western philosophy or thought the idea of death as a destroyer occurs, because one is struck by the parallel, in a sense, between the idea of St. Paul at one point where he quoted him, and the idea of the Kuntu force, the word being flesh, the combination of the logos and man. One would wonder if actually there was such a contradiction here, because it would appear that the idea of miracle, as it appears in Western culture, could be attributed to this process, which is described as Kuntu.
Yes.
One wonders where the idea of death as a destroyer occurs in Western philosophical thought as opposed to Africa, because you do find a lot of death, it would seem, in Africa. And again, well, your idea of Haiti, for instance, raises the question of, it seems to me that there is a great force of death and fear and disease and social disintegration and philosophical carrying cosmology at work in Haitian society.
That's true. Well, you see, I went into that of the zombie there in Haiti. The position he is explained, as I did, in throwing off Magara. And in the Western society you have, since the Holbein's death dances, always the death as a first step before judgment, final judgment. You have it in ancient Egyptian society also, the death in that specific quality of the it's more than in Africa, because the distance of the death of that person to the living person is just bigger. He's waiting somewhere, let's say, for a redemption, but he is not living around the deceased is not living around the living as you have it in general in African thinking. The gap between life and death in Western society, I would say, is enormously bigger than it is in African thinking, because death certainly is never pleasant, but as poetically is sometimes put in Africa, especially by Césaire, who is not an African and who turns around values. But I would say the gap here is in the Western society completely different than it is in Africa.
Plant growth, for instance, would help to reconcile the importance of the how in their society, and the importance of how, or rather what. What?
The importance of what, you mean? Well, I think that in the time
I
of...
think this is the proper approach. I mean, in other words, if you think it's important for them to learn in their own, by their own methods,
Well,
things that the Western world has learned, if they are to learn them.
yeah.
Not saying that they should, but I mean, if they are to learn them, this is the best way for their community and for their...
It is a question of interpretation. Something which comes from the Western world and is introduced into another culture and into another value system just needs reinterpretation to be alive. That means it must be expressed in other terms. You can easily do the same fact by a different interpretation of the fact. It does not matter for the efficiency whether you say a chemical formula is just something between objects, or if you say a chemical formula is a correct normal to transform kin to A into kin to B. The difference between it is only that the first form is an interpretation for the West, and the other might be a good interpretation for Africa. And we should bear that in mind if we are going to teach things like that. Because we do ourselves the same. No influence from Africa to the Western world was unchanged. It always gets reinterpretation when we adopt something. No dance ever having come from Africa to the Western world had the same meaning. Changed meaning was reinterpreted. The influence is visible. So the other way around, it's the same. No constitution will be interpreted there in the same way as it is in the West. It just gets a new kind of interpretation and another meaning. And we should bear that in mind, because the value of a demonstration is always only there if people understand the demonstration. Let me give you an example. Imagine two groups of farmers doing the same thing in Italy and in Dahomey, sowing seeds and singing at the same time. Now where the value of interpretation? The Italians would say, well, important is the sowing seeds. If we sing, we do it for make life easier, for make work more agreeable. Anyhow, it could be left away. The Dahomeans would say that the ceremony here is a correct normal to tell the Kintu seed what to do. That is essential. And the work of connected with it is just something we only have to do because we are in the hierarchy of Muntu forces very low down. Higher spirits, as Orishas, created the forest, said their magic word to the forest to grow, and it did so without that they worked. And so you have never seen a spirit work there. On the other hand, the Italians starting to demonstrate now that without singing, they can grow, the seed will grow. The Dahomeans would accuse them of singing secretly, because at least they have done into their action a meaning, and without thinking, they wouldn't have even sown the seeds. So you see, the question is only of interpretation, how you do it, and that's always in this problem where we are. We try to find out by a system like that what meaning might have been given, and some steps we get ahead. Please.
Is there, on your abstract categories here, is there any position to them, i.e. Is Muntu higher than or better than or greater than Kintu, or are they merely just groups of forces that do not have to be put in any particular order?
All Muntu in all civilization is in the center. That's what civilization has in common, that the thinking being is always in the center of every value system, and only the others can differ. Here, that's what all civilizations just have in common. Muntu is the center, rules everything.
Then in your metaphysical abstraction, how would you reconcile instances of Muntu taking on Kintu aspects, such as deities taking on Kintu aspects of animals or things, or, as you pointed out before, the essentially Kumtu small parts taking on Muntu aspects?
I would say that Muntu does not take Kintu aspects. I showed that yesterday in art. So far I haven't found one animal representation in African art where an animal is represented. It doesn't mean an animal. It's an animal in the sense, as you have it in fable, that the fox is slyness, that the elephant is strength, or the lion is prey, and let's say in the leopards in Dahomey are king's praise names, and the gold weights are proverbs. And art is here illustrative and uses the animal face for dehumanization. Why it's just an animal face, I don't know. But I do not find a representation of an animal which means an animal. That's just something I got out of the system and which was proved all around. But I could not get a step further.
We have two classes of phenomena here, then, by your own admission, obscure the line between Muntu and Kintu, make them mutually exclusive categories in your metaphysical system. Either animals or trees are supposedly in the Kintu group of forces because they are seen as animals or trees. And yet at the same time, animals and trees are given Muntu qualities, slyness, stayety, wisdom, and
I would say as symbols.
as symbols.
As symbols.
But you see, this is what I'm trying to get at, the exclusiveness of your categories here. At one level, they're fine. You can tell the difference between a panther and a human being. And I would have no doubt that since we're talking about unified Africa, any African walking down this path knows the difference between himself and the panther or elephant or whatever, or the tree. But at another level here, there is no difference.
Oh, yes.
There's no difference between at the level of the elephant representing slyness. You see. Therefore, a particular orisha, as you've called using the orisha, is represented by the animal representing slyness. There is no difference between the orisha and the animal in this particular case because they both equal slyness. So your categories then don't become mutually exclusive.
The slyness being just a quality and being not an animal. You use just an image, you see, and you do not use an animal at all.
Isn't
I
this
think
part of
that's
your
right.
unifying factor? I don't see any contradiction in the fact that you can have your categories distinct and yet one thing stand for another because your symbols always cross barriers of...
You would not have poetry. You see that you have in the whole world that you use for symbols, poetical images. But what you are trying to do is to say the poetical image of the elephant applied, let's say, as intelligence, is then the elephant. It is not.
No, I'm not saying it is then the elephant. I'm saying that poetical image, poetical image is when identified with something other than the elephant. See? If you call it, I don't know if I can explain this quite clearly, because it isn't so clear in my mind. If you use an elephant to represent a god, the figure of an elephant, the image of an elephant. But when using this, do not mean this God is an elephant. You mean that this
Mm.
elephant represents intelligence.
Mm.
Therefore, the God is intelligent. You see.
Mm.
The elephant at that particular time does not become an elephant anymore. He's no longer
No,
a
no,
thing.
no.
He is
No.
intelligence.
Yeah.
And the God is no longer a God. He is too intelligence.
Mm-mm.
And
No,
there is,
no.
there is-
You see, here you make a different. There is one thing wrong in what you say, that the attribute used, to this subject, you mix up with the subject itself. You see it easily in African art. The antelope on the mask is not the mask. You see, it is just a determinant for the mask.
But it is not the antelope either.
Of course not. It is not the antelope. I said it is not an antelope. The antelope means here magic force. And the mask remains a mask of the spirit, which only as an attribute can have now the antelope as an illustration of a specific meaning. But if you were right, the most mask wouldn't exist at all, where you have several so-called animals and combined to tell this person is sly and is strong, or this spirit is sly and is strong and is magic, and then you take different horns and different kinds of animal images to express that. But that does not mean that the spirit itself has been changed into a threefold or double-fold kind of animal.
No,
Not at all.
I never said that. But what I do claim is this: that if you, what I am getting at is that if you consider these categories as separate entities of forces, you say all things are force.
Yeah.
The one unifying factor being Untu, or the life force.
The unifying factor isn't two, the universal force, of which all are parts.
Of which all are parts, right?
Yes.
These categories merely then are the atomization of Untu into its various parts. Now, a thing that is in Kintu must therefore have or be a part of that group of forces called Kintu. My question is to you: can something be in Kintu and Muntu at the same time?
No,
No.
no, couldn't be. Of course not. Otherwise, the whole separation wouldn't make any sense.
But then what about, you see, then you have, when you talked about, let's get off this animal bit, because it's much too confusing in art. But let's back to smallpox. When you talked about smallpox, you're talking about something as Kuntu.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it becomes deified into an Orisha.
Mhm.
Now, when it becomes deified, does it stop being Kuntu?
I think so. As here the value is very important on Kuntu, it is near, and that it gives an explanation to many facts in Africa, that Kuntu forces can be deified, can be put up here, as soon as they get personified. You see, here the personification is of smallpox, which would be a Kuntu force. The personification, the man bringing it, the God bringing and taking it, is the Kuntu force personified and recognized as such, being then in the rank of Orisha. I think that is quite logical.
I wonder if by implication we don't have two conflicting approaches here to African civilization. On one hand, there's the construction of a system which you apply to African society or societies, and apparently would consider modifying if the evidence found it incomplete or found new examples to work with it. And another approach which would just call for the total examination of the society in and of itself, its history, the forces of stress within the society, the Semitic or ethnic, and then trying to find the philosophy of it and constructing it totally on its own lines as its own unity. And I wonder if this isn't implied in both your position and the questions that are coming at you.
Mm-hmm. You are quite right.
I wonder if they're reconcilable.
I'm afraid that we can't really try as much as we would like to stay on, but you have this appointment after 9. I think that this has been one of our most interesting sessions, and I'm very grateful to you for coming to us tonight, Mr.
I
Jahn.
thank you for the very interesting question.